Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to those in person and online for our 5th Strategic Landpower Dialogue discussion. I'm Lieutenant General Retired Leslie Smith, AUSA's Vice President for Leadership and Education. I used to be a Lieutenant Colonel. Today, we're in for a treat, as we have not one, not two, but 3 experts here to discuss with us the air and missile defense of Guam. I want to thank CSIS again for this partnership with AUSA, as well as General Dynamics, for the support in making these excellent discussions possible. Many of you have probably heard the saying that America's day begins in Guam. Although Guam is 8,000 miles from where we are today, being able to defend it is vital for those 170,000 American citizens and over 6,000 active duty service members on the island. And as America's westernmost territory, closer to Beijing than Hawaii, Guam is the linchpin of the Joint Forces' ability to project power in America's priority Indo-Pacific theater. But this location places the American citizens and service members on Guam at high risk, well within the range of increasingly sophisticated air and missile defense, threats from the PRC and DPRK that could be targeted at any island in any contingency. Fortunately, today our 3 experts will help shed some light on the air and missile threats facing Guam and how the Joint Force is working to create comprehensive air and missile defense of the island. Since I know you all look forward to hearing from our speakers and we have limited time, I will only describe their current positions, but I encourage you to see their full bios linked on the CSIS events page, where you can see all of their extensive qualifications. Lieutenant General Robert Rasch has served as Director of the Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technologies Office since September 2022. In his role as Director of RCCTO, Lieutenant General Rasch is responsible for the rapid fielding of capabilities to deter and defeat rapidly modernizing adversaries. In February of 2024, he was also designated as the Executive Officer of the new Joint Program Office for the Guam Defense System. In this capacity, he is tasked with overseeing acquisition technology needed to develop and field a 360-degree air and missile defense capability for Guam. BG Frank Lozano assumed the role of PEO Missiles in Space in August 2022. He's responsible for the development, production, fielding, sustainment, and international program aspects for assigned missile and space systems. Finally, joining us today virtually, Brigadier General Patrick Costello is the Commanding General of the 94th AAMD Defense Command. As the 94th AMDC Commander, BG Costello leads and integrates all Army air defense assets in the Indo-Pacific region with joint and multinational partners and allies. I know our audience is extremely excited to hear from these experts. So now I'll hand it over to Dr. Tom Carrico, who will moderate the discussion. Over to you, Tom.
Well, thank you, General Smith, and thanks again to the whole AUSA team for this partnership. As General Smith was saying, building an air and missile defense for Guam is a big challenge. It's, if not the largest, perhaps the hardest such problem. It's been described as the perfect air and missile defense problem. And we've got the folks here today that have to figure out how to architect it, how to operate it, how to acquire it, and on a bad day, how to fight the fight to defend that island. For those here in person and for those online, if you've got questions, and a lot have already come in already, please go to the event page, and you can put them in there, and they'll come via Resilient Army Networks to my tablet, and I'll direct them to the panel. So thanks, General Rasch, General Lozano, General Costello. Thank you all for being here. And we're going to get into the nooks and crannies of Guam, every hill and seashore, just real quick. But before we do that, because this is the Strategic Landpower Dialogue, we always open with the threshold question. And that is, from your respective portfolios, not just related to Guam, how do you view the role of land power within the Joint Force, both today and in the 2040 timeframe?
Sure. So I'll kick it off, and I know certainly General Costello's got some Guam-specific aspects of that, but But the land force is a critical component of the joint force overall. The ability to control land, resources, people on the ground, regardless of where you are in the world. And as an enabler of that from a material developer perspective, the capabilities that we're tasked to provide to give that commander the flexibility to execute those missions is really what my organization, RCCTO, is focused on. And that's whether it's hypersonics, whether it's mid-range capability, which we've seen, directed energy, or looking out into more in the 2030, 2040 timeframe, unmanned ground vehicles as we look at human-machine integrated formations. And how do we integrate autonomy into those formations as we see the battlefield changing. The land force will always, I think, be a critical component of that joint force.
General Lozano.
Yeah, and I agree with General Rasch. Just remember, you are talking to 3 Army guys. I think it would be heresy if I said I didn't believe in the tenets of land power. But I think we can take a look around the world in the CENTCOM AOR and what's going on in Europe right now. And even actions that we're concerned about and focused on in the Indo-PACOM AOR. There's a lot of ocean in the Indo-PACOM AOR, but we're focused on securing and protecting the land components of the different island chains. So my job as a material developer is to ensure that I can enable ground-land maneuver operations within the land domain. And so I'm keenly focused on what air and missile defense capabilities bring to protecting and ensuring that maneuverability, and then what long-range precision fires brings to that land component of the fight.
General Costello, who's, of course, the Indo-PACOM headquarters, another island in the Pacific. Over to you, sir.
Hey, thanks, Tom, and thanks for all the sponsors. I appreciate the ability to join from Hawaii today. But the role of the land force here in the Indo-Pacific, I really will channel some of my bosses here as we talk about the roles of the theater army within the Pacific, which is really the linchpin to the joint forces' success through our ability to sustain, protect, command and control, and then add maneuver and fires into that. And then as the leader of a theater enabling command, we are trying to defend long enough to enable the joint force commander to meet their objectives. Over.
Well, I appreciate that, and I wonder if Rasch, and General Lozano and Costello, we might work through it. Give a little more of an intro. You've already done a little bit in terms of RCCTO and PEO missiles in space, about the breadth of your portfolio, and perhaps how much of it fits the Guam problem. Of course, you have 2 hats, JPO as well as RCCTO. So
actually, from a portfolio perspective, we do cover a wide range, both offensive, defensive, and even into unmanned ground systems. But really, when you look at the mission of RCCTO, is to try to accelerate those science and technology endeavors to an operational prototype to then transition to the great PEOs like General Lozano, the other PEOs that would accept these systems into their portfolio for long-term procurement and development. So our mission set as it flows down through my board of directors, the Secretary of the Army, Chief Staff of the Army, under Vice, as they see those needs and they want to go fast, they send those to RCCTO, and we build the team. So it's a very agile organization where I'm bringing people in for a hard mission problem. Once we prove the capability out or not, those people, we divest of those people. They go to the gaining PEO or on to the next mission.
General Lozano, you've got a lot of missiles in your PEO that touch on this. How would you characterize the overlaps?
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom. And yeah, so I've got a very exciting, relevant job. PEO Missile and Space, a very large, capable organization, very proud of what that workforce in that organization accomplishes every day. So I've got 3 colonel level project managers. I call them my air and missile defense project managers. And we manage the full suite of Army air and missile defense capabilities. So huge task, big job, and they do tremendous work every day. I also have another 3 06 colonel level project managers that I call my offensive and strategic fires project managers. I'll start off with a TAGM office that manages a lot of our aviation munitions and missiles, but also ground systems like Javelin and TOW. I've got a PRISM storm project office that manages, PRISM and guided MLRS and ATACMs. And then as General Rasch indicated, I've stood up a strike PM. We call it Task Force Strike today. It's got MRC, medium range capability in it today, and then we'll eventually accept a long range hypersonic weapon from the RCCTO. And so those are my 6 major programmatic efforts. But I also am the Army's Office of Primary Responsibility, Army OPR, for all counter UAS capabilities. And so I work across all the PEOs to field relevant, timely counter UAS capabilities around the globe. So a huge job, but absolutely love it, and I've got a great team.
Yeah. And General Costello, I wonder if you might situate the 94th AAMDC. You've got a big AOR. How you might think about the initiatives of the 94th broadly within the region and Guam more specifically.
No, absolutely, Tom. First, I think I had the best job in the Army, so I'd argue with General Lozano on that. But the soldiers of the 94th AAMDC, 24/7, 365, are literally the first line of defense here in the Pacific. And whether that's in Guam, Japan, Hawaii, or Korea, we have soldiers that are doing this and watching the skies on a hourly and daily basis. So very briefly, the command really fills 3 roles here in the Indo-Pacific as this theater enabling command. First, under the Theater Army, I serve as the Senior Air Defense Commander in the theater. Second, I serve as the Theater Air and Missile Defense Coordinator, coordinating ground-based air defense on behalf of the Theater Army. And then lastly, my joint hat, and probably where I spend about half to 75% of my time, is really in support of the JFAC's role as the Area Air Defense Commander, serving as his deputy, managing the readiness and the employment of the joint force based on threats and indicators and warnings here in the theater.
Well, thank you. General Rasch, I think I want to come back to you and kind of dig into the JPO. Stood up formally this spring. Wasn't an FY24 PB, but presumably will be in the future. How would you characterize the work? What's the job of the JPO? Sure. And kind of what's the status of that work?
It's a great question, because it's absolutely outside of the normal RCCTO type of missions where it's go really fast, build a prototype. We're not building a prototype Defense of Guam. We're responsible for the overall implementation of long-term Defense of Guam. So is the DepSecDef assigned Service Acquisition Executive responsibility down to the Army? With the DAE is, Dr. LaPlante is overall, my milestone decision authority. Appointed myself, I'm wearing 2 hats now, RCCTO Director and Joint Program Executive Officer for Guam Defense Systems, with this really difficult mission. So it is like RCCTO because it's RCCTO hard, but in a different way. We're not just necessarily going really fast, but trying to do something that has not been done with integrated air missile defense and truly integrate capabilities to give the combatant command, to give commanders like General Costello the flexibility they need to fight an adaptive enemy, and to have the defense systems as well to accomplish that mission. And then working and bringing all the agencies and services that are building components of this, because it's the one thing a lot of people don't realize is I'm not responsible for LTAMs. Or IFPC, or VLS launchers, or the SM-6 missile. Those are capabilities that are being provided by PEOs and project managers and product managers across the different organizations, but to ensure that as we deliver that capability, and then the command and control, and I know we'll talk more about command and control as we weave into this a little deeper, how those things manifest to turn into a capability, which requires the material, the soldiers trained, or servicemen and women, because this more than likely will not just be an Army fight. This will be a joint fight, and the training and sustainment for all those capabilities on island.
And this is, as you say, multi-services, multi-agencies. How are you synchronizing that? How is the JPO able to do that? You've got the commands, you've got the services, you've got other entities. How is that coming along?
So at this point, early on, I would characterize it as coalition of the willing. We have been officially designated, as you pointed out. It was not in PB24. Still waiting on a reprogramming action to occur so I can start manning. So this large JPO that you're imagining is at about 8 people right now. And those 8 people are working really, really hard establishing the network of communications. Missile Defense Agency has been a tremendous partner. PEO Missiles and Space has been a tremendous partner because this effort didn't just start with us, right? Missile Defense Agency has been leading this for a couple of years now, and all credit to my good buddy General Collins and his team, John Beer, who have been kind of doing the yeoman's work on getting the funding laid in and developing that initial architecture that we're picking up and going to carry through to completion. As we get resourced and as we get some key decisions out of DoD on element transition partners, who's going to own some of this equipment at the end of the day, we will flesh the rest of this program office out. As we finish up with our requirements document, which is in staffing now, and actually start working with Indo-PACOM on how they want to fight this system, we will continue to evolve how that integration will occur and what it needs to look like to support that commander.
And of course, there's the Navy and the Air Force as well. Anything you want to say on those?
Both the Navy and the Air Force have components they're contributing. Obviously, Aegis Guam system is being kind of designed specifically for this mission set, and the Air Force with Talk Light as well. So really a cacophony of command and control systems that right now, today's fight, we're fighting in a swivel chair fashion. And we think we can do better. We think we need to do better.
And we'll get to the orchestration of that cacophony in just a bit. But let me, I think, kind of take a step back. And that's the JPO. But what is the nature of the problem that you're trying to solve? Because, look, the Army, as the kind of lead on GBAD, generally, the Army does all kinds of air defense around the world. CENTCOM, all over the place. What is it about Guam or the threat that requires a bigger undertaking than all of the other air and missile defenses that we've done in the past? You said that this is kind of our first really integrated and layered effort. What is it about Guam that's different?
So, great question, Ty. I know Pat has some thoughts on this, but from a material perspective, it's looking at the complex threat. We're looking at a pacing threat of China that has offensive capabilities. Unlike anything we've been seeing, obviously, in CENTCOM, unlike anything that right now we're seeing in Europe. And it requires us to think differently. As it requires us to try to maximize the performance of these different systems brought in from the services, to make sure that that we're looking at what's the most effective interceptor against the threat, and to not leave it to chance that we have, I think we've talked previously, 2 really bad situations occur. A threat's coming in and one service thinks the other service has it, and nobody engages. Or almost as bad, both services engage. We're looking at a small space, we're looking at a potential adversary that has a lot of capability and capacity. And so we have to be very efficient with how we utilize the capabilities we have. So it's causing us to think differently.
General Costello, would you like to talk about kind of what's characteristic of this problem?
No, absolutely, Tom. Really starting with the threat, as General Rasch mentioned, that the PRC has the ability to mask a number of different threats against a lot of places in the Pacific, really anywhere. There is no sanctuary any longer in the Pacific. Against Guam in this case, and we need to be able to defend this important, which is one of many important, but one of the most important force projection or combat power projection hubs and spokes that we have within the Pacific. And as we take a look at this, if deterrence should fail, the Theater Army requires capabilities, posture, signaling, and will. And this composite battalion that the Army is providing for the defense of Guam meets all of those requirements.
So if I could dovetail on what General Rasch talked about. So there's, in and of themselves, the large number of threats that we would plan to have to address and mitigate. The other aspect of that campaign would be the fact that we would likely be fighting in a contested environment, right? And so when you look at each individual system, those systems may operate suboptimally in a contested environment against these massive threats. So the integration of these capabilities really makes the whole of the capability much greater than the sum of its individual components. And the sum of the components is typically how we would fight. But we've realized that that's not adequate nor sufficient for fighting against the PRC in the future.
I mean, April 14, Israel and a coalition of some close friends dealt with 550 some objects coming in from Iran and from some of its other neighbors. And this is orders of magnitude greater. And so I guess I would direct it to you again, General Rasch. You know, some folks look at this and say, how is this possible? How can we possibly do this? Can we just sit there and play catch indefinitely? How do you take that?
So it's a great point, and it's actually one of the questions or the discussions we're having with the COM in Indo-Pacific is how long to defend, right? You can't, as you pointed out, you can't catch forever. There's got to be a time. There's got to be a finite aspect of that that we can plan our defenses around, and that goes down to not just the architecture, but the magazine depth that you lay in, and it's something that will continue to evolve over time because there's a resourcing aspect of it as well. But our goal from a joint program office perspective is ensure the architecture is there to support whatever the missile depth is. And as we layer in other things, you know, non-kinetic capabilities, those integrated as well, and to provide the flexibility then to the commander on how they want to fight it. And that's what's a little different than how we've done before. You know, as General Lozano pointed out, you know, systems have capabilities and we fight them certain ways and we pull up the playbook and this is how we do it. We have pre-planned responses. In this case, we're imagining a more flexible and dynamic environment. Even geographically speaking, you know, as we build this architecture out and we prove it in a very hard problem set like Guam, because it is small, there's a lot of capability we're talking about putting there. Why couldn't I pick this architecture up and transfer it to the homeland, transfer it to EUCOM? Not the actual systems, but the architecture, so I can build it in another place. So it's an enabling function that not only benefits Indo-PACOM, but really all the combat commands.
Yeah. General Costello, again, I want to kind of accentuate what's especially hard here and what is especially, I guess, unique, even though we're likely to have this level of complex integrated attack in other parts of the world over time. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the doctrine and rules of engagement. I think General Smith mentioned that Guam is closer to Beijing than it is to Hawaii, where you're at today. It's a little hard to reach back to Indo-PACOM headquarters for some of the ROE. And so how do you think about that?
No, absolutely, Tom. You know, General Lozano mentioned a little bit on the C2 piece, and command relationships are complex here in the Pacific, just given the tyranny of time, distance, and time zones. But regardless of what command relationships are, we have a good framework for control, right? The control of fires, and in this case, the control of defensive fires. What we really have to work, not only here, but anywhere in a contested environment, is the ability to make decisions at tactically relevant timelines. And to do that, we're working hand in hand with the Air Force on instituting decentralized command and control systems so that decisions can be made for the defense of the second island chain from the second island chain and don't have to come back to Hawaii. Decisions for the defense of anywhere in the Pacific need to be made from those locations, especially when we start talking about the contributions of partners and allies. When you talk about doctrine, Tom, I think we got to go back and look at the systems that General Lozano is developing here. So the lower tier air and missile defense sensor, the integrated air and missile defense battle command system, the integrated fire protection capability of PIC, really cruise missile defense. All of these are game changers within the air and missile defense community and are going to fundamentally change the way that we're organized and employed. And so the team back at Fort Sill, led by the Commandant, the Fire Center of Excellence, is really taking a hard look at doctrine and joint doctrine and how things change. The Air Force has made a lot of public comments recently that the days of air superiority and air supremacy are likely over against peer adversaries. And as we look at not only lessons learned from within Israel's conflict right now and that with Russia and Ukraine, survivability, the ability to have systems that have redundancy and control systems that have redundancy are a significant importance here.
Well, and since you mentioned it, General Lozano, over you want to highlight maybe some of the systems? You have a lot of new stuff coming online, IBCS, IFPC second missile, a lot of things that LTAMs, as was just mentioned, that are just coming off the line or about to come off the line. I don't think PEO Missile Base has ever had so many new air and missile defense things come off simultaneously or near so.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, this problem presents a lot of unique challenges from different multiple perspectives. And so, I will often joke that, one major modernization effort or program in a branch is usually a huge deal. We're essentially modernizing the entire branch. And some will probably argue it's been a long time coming. So you're right, there's LTAMs, there's IFPC. I just took, General Rasch and I took PAC-3 MSE through a full-rate production decision just in 2017. So it is relatively new and obviously a world-class interceptor. So problem number one is getting all those programs across the goal line. I've had and have a terrific partner over at the Army Test and Evaluation Command in the recently, the former commander, Major General Jay Gallivan, and the current commander, Major General Pat Gaydon. And they've been incredible teammates because we have to push the envelope on testing and be aggressive and maintain very schedule-intensive focus to achieve the milestones and the timelines that we're looking at. So not only do I have to get those individual programs across the goal line, they all have to work together. And we realized early on that we had to relook how we did things. It became so paramount for us to examine ourselves and look at ourselves to understand how we would do this integration that the first thing we needed to do was change our own PEO culture. And in 2019, General Rasch led the PEO through a realignment, right? Before, every PM was sort of an empire unto itself, managing its own stovepiped system. Now we have project offices for sensors. We have a project office for mission command. We have a project office for effectors, right? And we knew the only way that we were going to change the culture was to change the developmental mindset, to start forecasting from a developmental perspective, what were the challenges that on the battlefield were going to have to be solved. And if we could solve those in the system engineering process, then we make the operator and the warfighter's job that much easier. And so...
And the best decision I made at the time was we had the individual offices. We knew there was an integrating function and wasn't quite sure how to wrap my head around that. And then Colonel Lozano was in charge of that organization. So the entire integrated fires test campaign kind of came out of his hard thinking on how do we bring these things together? How do we bring ATEC in the loop? How do we bring the warfighter who's used to going out and testing an individual system to look at this in a new way? And thanks to Frank's great work there, kind of laying the groundwork for that, they're into that routine now where they're just going out. It's systems of systems testing, which isn't the way we've done things in the past.
Right.
Well, I think it's fair to say that we've had a few CSIS reports saying that long time in coming revitalization of Army AMD is indeed the case. And I think Army AMD is growing to like $7 billion by FY27. For the kind of things that you're talking about. That's getting to be real money because the threat's getting to be real. I do have to ask just a quick follow-up in terms of the second interceptor for IFPC. Supersonic cruise missiles, likely to see a few of those in the Pacific, but also some rockets and artillery kind of thing. How do you think about the priority for that in the context of Guam and otherwise? Yeah,
so second interceptor is very important. First and foremost, IFPC Increment 2, very important system. We're doing very well. The Leidos, Dianetics, Raytheon team working very closely together. And we've got a milestone C coming up in the second quarter of 25 and a very important Integrated Fires Test Campaign 24 coming up this fall, where we'll actually pull in for the first time IBCS, Patriot, LTAMs, IFPC, Sentinel A4, roll those all into the next iteration of our Integrated Fires Test Campaign. But that platform with AIM-9X, great subsonic cruise missile killer. But we know that there is going to be predominantly a large quantity of supersonic cruise missiles we'll need to address in Indo-PACOM, but you could argue globally as well. So IFPC Second Interceptor is intended to get us to be able to address that threat. Now, you could argue, and the arguments may have been made, that NASAMS is a great supersonic cruise missile killer. I will argue it's a foreign system. And there comes some evils with us buying foreign systems. Usually we have no intellectual property data rights, and I'm tied to the OEM for sustainment for eternity, or as long as that system is in the inventory, and that can become a very expensive proposition. Without IP rights, it becomes very hard to integrate, right? So one of the core components of our entire modernization strategy is, as we perform competitions, we know we have to negotiate intellectual property rights so we can lower the bar and make integration much easier, right? And so Second Interceptor is a competitive opportunity. I've been signaling the industry the need for improved propellant recipes so that we get longer ranges and shorter time of flight, and improved engagement calculators that allow us to hit those faster moving supersonic cruise missile threats. That's a program that is funded across the POM, and we intend to, we've issued a number of RFIs. My team is preparing to execute a full and open competition in FY25 to look for essentially what I've been communicating is an AIM-120D-like capability in an AIM-9X package, because the key is magazine depth.
It's got to squeeze in.
Yeah. I'm looking for magazine depth. Having 6 missiles on a launcher and having about a 45-minute reload time, you're not going to be survivable in a Guam defensive situation. No. IFPC right now with AIM-9X has 18 interceptors, and we're shooting for something like that on Second Interceptor, that application on IFPC, because I've got to preserve the magazine depth to be able to service the quantity of threats we expect to defend against.
It's not just new kit that's going to show up and be airdropped on the island. The Army and the Joint Forces putting them together in different ways. I'm thinking of a couple things here. Different types of composite units, right? Not have Legacy Patriot parked next to Legacy THAAD, plugging them together with IAMD units. So different kinds of composite units. Curious about your thoughts on the value, any of you gentlemen on that. And then likewise, how do we mix and are we equipped doctrinally to mix kinetic and non-kinetic fires together?
Hey, Tom, let me jump in first here. And first, if I can go back to the previous kind of discussion very briefly. The gentlemen on the stage are too humble, but the impact, I cannot overstate the impact, the positive impact that the PEO reorganization and the Integrated Fires Test Campaign has for the warfighter. Being able to test numbers of systems together as we're going to employ them, as opposed to individually, along funding lines and other things like we've done in the past. This does not work anymore. And the stuff that both General Rasch started and General Lozano has continued have an immense impact for us. With regard to your next question, we have to fight in the future as composite organizations within the Air and Missile Defense Branch. And the Army's taking a hard look at that right now. We have to be able to meet the needs of the combatant command, the supported force in our defensive efforts against a multitude of different threats simultaneously. And the ability that Integrated Air and Missile Defense Battle Command System allows us to employ, or the flexibility that it provides to allow us to employ our forces differently and smaller, tailor-made force packages to meet the threat is going to be of paramount importance in the future. You look at the complex attacks that are going on in the Ukraine right now. We talked about a little bit of the PRC threat that we would expect to see if deterrence should fail. And you look at the threat from about a month and a half, 2 months ago into Israel. We have to organize as composite organizations to be able to meet this threat. And we have to be able to layer, to your second kind of follow on there, we have to be able to layer in and leverage non-kinetic fires the same way that we leverage kinetic fires. And we have to be able to make those decisions quickly.
Yeah, another facet to that discussion in some critical work that General Rasch is doing is our layered defensive approach. And right, so as we move forward in the software development effort for IBCS and integrate the capabilities, we always have to be mindful of the defense design and that layered capability from, starting off with THAAD or SM-6 and then coming down to Patriot and then AIM-9X or IFPC Second Interceptor and then directed energy and then electronic warfare, non-kinetic type capabilities. You have to be able to set up the defense design, and then to General Rasch's earlier point, from a dynamic perspective, the system has to be able to assess the number of threats and how they're coming in, right? So are we going to be overwhelmed by Group 3 UASs that are going to suck up a whole bunch of radar resources, and then the exquisites, IRBMs, and hypersonics going to come in? Or are the hypersonics and IRBMs going to come in first, and then we're going to get overwhelmed at the same time with the Group 3s and the supersonic cruise missiles, right? So you have to have a battle management fire control system capable of adjusting on the fly based on how threats are presented, and then real time making teeing up decisions for operators to make so that they're survivable and they win in that defensive scenario.
To the composite formation question, certainly I absolutely believe it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to employ our forces, but I would say we don't have a choice, right? We have a capability and capacity challenge in air missile defense. You noted the blow up in budget. It takes a while to build all this equipment. There's never going to be enough air defense soldiers. If you look at the demands from the combat commands, they would suck up all 15 Patriot battalions we have and everything, each of them individually. So going to this composite structure, allowing us to build the package based upon the individual threat, gives us more flexibility in how we employ those around the globe, not just for Indo-PACOM, but also to EUCOM and even Defense of Homeland.
Let me follow up on the dynamic part of that, the flexible part of that. Intuitively, of course, we've got to have that. Not enough capacity, you've got to do that better. How much work has to be done to realize that dynamism, right? How much NRE needs to be done between here and there to make that not just an aspiration from today's systems? How much can you quantify that for us as you think about the architecture and how it would be fought?
I can't pin down an NRE cost for you, but so I think it depends on how you look at the problem, though, right? So you could come in from a clean sheet of paper perspective and say, hey, I need to build a new fire control system that not only does everything that the Army does, but also brings in all the MDA systems and all the Navy systems. Let's bring Air Force, and oh, by the way, space has assets, do all that, and in 15 years, in several billions of dollars, we'll be ready to take it to test, maybe. Or you can look at what we have today and weigh each of it on its own merits, because these systems are proven that we're bringing on island. IBCS, obviously has gotten through its IoT and full rate production decision, so it's proven. Aegis, long storied history of that. C2BMC, Talk Light, all of these systems bring something to the table. So the question and the way I looked at the problem was, how can I do this the most efficient way, which also probably benefits from a training perspective, from a service culture perspective. Sailors are used to fighting Aegis systems, and although this is Aegis Guam, it's still going to look and feel like Aegis. Same as IBCS is going to be on island, but it's going to be IBCS. How do we put that layer of integration across the top? And be as minimally invasive as I have to with the fire control systems. Because that's the difference in this. When people think just command and control, you say, oh, it's command and control. I'm just aggregating data up. It's easy. But when you look at the fire control aspects of missile defense, those are very intricate algorithms and functions and data that are processing with an IBCS and Aegis. And you don't want to perturbate those if you don't have to, because bad things can happen if you make the wrong mistake. So how to look at it from a minimally invasive approach to those, to really take the goodness of those from a prioritization of resources against the threat, realizing that there's areas of overlap between some Army capabilities and Navy capabilities. A good example of that would be SM-6 and PAC-3 MSE, both on the cruise missile front as well as TBM, towards endgame, towards terminal, where you really have to, I think, be careful and have that have an adjudication level above and beyond those individual fire control systems to make recommendations to the decision maker where they pass it back down to those individual systems to execute. That's how we're looking at the problem now. Got a lot of studies ongoing right now to really understand what's that mean from an NRE perspective, and how to really try to minimize that, because DoD is investing a ton in those individual capabilities. If I were to do a clean sheet of paper fire control system on top of it all, it would probably capture all the money invested already in those individual systems just on top of the fire control system development, NRE, and then the testing required to execute that. So if you think about it from a testing, and we're on DOT&E oversight, lots of good conversations with our DOT&E community, I get to leverage all of the individual testing that General Lozano is doing for all his systems, all the testing that MDA does for theirs, all the testing that the Navy has done. And really, I only have to test those touch points where we have to make those decisions, SM-6 or PAC-3 MSE. Those are the types of things that we develop our test program, we'll really have to focus on. So there's a lot of savings there in testing and time.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you're going right to the integration problem. You've described it as an integration layer, a battle management layer. I've heard you talk about dynamic battle management to deconflict those handful of things where, no kidding, there would be potential overlap. And yet, in this world, and perhaps I would say across DoD, the word integration tends to be something of a Rorschach test. Everybody hears something different. And so, you mentioned studies. You mentioned that you're asking the questions. What are the questions that you're trying to ask and get answers to about how to create that integration layer, that battle management layer? What are the questions? What are the types of problems that go into that? What are the functions that need to be achieved first and foremost?
There's a lot to unpack there, but a couple of key things. First, the air picture, right? So when you're looking at track ID, Aegis will do track IDs differently than IBCS. Its sensors are looking at the threat at a different point in time. So even though LTAMs may pick it up later, SPY-6 picks it up earlier, there might be a different identification. Well, that creates a problem, right? When you're trying to say, hey, let's shoot at that thing. Well, what thing? One system calls it a space object, one calls it an air object. Now I have a challenge in our system. So how do we get that part right? And that's where systems like Joint Track Management capability, which is really trying to get at, I'll say, normalizing the track picture, so we truly have a unique global track that all systems agree on. And if I can get that, and I can get that to the user, I mean, that would be hallelujah right there, right? No dual tracks, from a track management perspective. Then you can start looking at, well, how do we engage? How do we prosecute an engagement? And what's the best mechanism to do that? Is it using systems from Aegis? Is it using systems from the Army with IBCS? Based upon the commander's, his perspective of the battlefield, how he wants to maintain maybe a certain reserve of certain magazine capacity for a future threat. But to give them those decision aids in a very, very timely manner. And that's the key. When you look at the volume of stuff coming in, it's not onesies or twosies, it's hundreds, potentially thousands all at once. And just imagine trying to declutter that from a user interface perspective. The system can do it very, technology today can do it very well behind the scenes. But how do we distill that down to simple decisions that can be executed very, very rapidly? Again, to push it back to where the systems do that automatic, or I don't want to say the word automatic, but do that prosecution of it based upon a human's decision. So a human makes a decision in this joint battle management layer, it automatically gets adjudicated down to the system that's prosecuting the fire control. It acknowledges, it engages, it reports back up, so the user has acknowledgement that threat is being addressed onto the next threat. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, let's pull on a couple of those things. One, the Joint Track Management Bridge. It's getting to that deconfliction of Aegis picks up 3 objects, IBCS picks up 3 objects. Is it 3 objects or is it 6 objects? How mature would you say that is in terms, I know it's done well in tests and things like that, and are there other candidates, I'm thinking C2BMC, other things like that are also kind of in that vein?
Well, so Joint Track Management is the only one that is doing, really helping with the composite track. And so whether Aegis sees 3 things or IBCS sees 2 things, each of those systems have composite trackers. So what the JTMC is allowing is those individual systems to take those sensor associated measurement reports. It's not taking tracks, taking measurement report data and compositing it within its tracks that it has already. I think from an air breather, from a cruise missile, air threat, the capability is pretty mature. We'll continue to work to develop that, to get to that next layer of more advanced threats, and MDA is leaning forward in that realm. Just had a meeting with General Collins and team yesterday on how do we get after that, because we don't need to just focus on air. This is BMD down to air. From a user perspective, they don't necessarily distinguish between the two. It's coming at them. But that capability has matured a lot. Saw the first demo of it in 2011, and it didn't take it this long to mature, actually. It really took, I think in a lot of cases, IBCS a while to catch up, to be able to really manage the numbers of associated measurement reports coming across, to work those into their composite algorithms for use.
I think you're right. It's been out there for a while, hasn't got a whole lot of attention or funding until just recently. But General Costello, I wonder if you could speak as an operator, as you just think about the air defenders who have those thousands of things perhaps coming in at once. What does a battle management aid look like? What does a decision aid look like to an operator to deconflict what is a very messy and confusing air picture? Could you kind of explain that to us?
I'm writing all this down, Pat, and I'll hold you to it later.
Yeah, thanks, sir. I appreciate that. And Tom, it's a great question. It's a hard question, but I want to start by saying having multiple different joint sensors, interceptors, command and control systems to help detect, track, and neutralize threats is a good problem to have, because it means we have layered joint air and missile defense, right? And so we are in much better shape because we have options than we would be if we didn't have options. And so I see this as an opportunity as opposed to a challenge. The fact that the associated measurement reports that General Rasch talked about can be used by a number of different interceptors, right? If I can take TIPI-6 data in this case and use a Patriot interceptor to shoot off of that data, that is a huge step in joint integrated air and missile defense. And so these options are good things. With regard to the battle management aids, we talked about the systems a little bit that are going to be resident within the Guam Command Center, right? So we've got the integrated air missile defense weapon system, or battle command system. We've got the Aegis ground system. We've got C2BMC. We've got the Air Force TOC light. Bringing all these systems together in one kind of place with joint operators, with the right authorities in the right place. And so the area air defense commander delegating authorities at his time and location when necessary to enable the air defense artillery fire control officers to make decisions, right, based on data that is integrated from all these different systems. And we are not just waiting until Guam to do this, right? So the Army, through a number of different experiments, Convergence and Capstone, in Valiant Shield, just executed here within the last 2 months in Indo-PACOM, in Nimble Fire, in the several events that we have coming up in the future, both here in the Pacific and back through General Lozano's Integrated Fires Test Campaign. we bring all of these systems together so that operators can start to get a feel for what the screens that they're going to be looking at to enable decisions are actually going to look like. And I think we're heading in the right direction. The cooperation that we've had across the joint community and integrating all of these different C2 systems to ensure that the data makes sense, given the different ways that the different systems process data, has been incredible. And it's something that I would have, as a younger officer, said that would never happen. So let me stop there and see if that answers your question, Tom.
Yeah, and I wonder, General Lozano, if you might, from an acquisition perspective, presumably there's an AI and machine learning aspect of this to very quickly get after that. What do you see as the promise there, and how much needs yet to be done to bring that into all these different and distinct fire control systems?
Yeah, and I think we're really at a special point in time. Sometimes I like to say it's better to be lucky than good. And while we're trying to solve this very hard computer processing fire control algorithmic function problem, here on the side you've got the emergence of artificial intelligence, right? These complex algorithms that are going to be multifunctional and help, sometimes we overlabel problems as AI. Maybe sometimes it's just a hard math problem. But when you're looking at multiple different threats in the air, when you're dealing with electronic warfare countermeasures, when you're trying to resolve issues in the battle space to make sure you're actually looking at a real life threat, that's all processing in the back end that has to occur in hundreds of milliseconds in order to allow an operator to make a timely engagement decision on a mass of different complex threats, right? And so I think we're in a very special point in time right now where we have the emergence of AI and we have this very hard problem that we have to solve. And I've been encouraging industry to work together with different companies to make sure that we experience this confluence of technological advancement with our not only government focus, but congressional support from a funding perspective to ensure that we realize the outcome that we're looking for. I will take a moment for a little paid public announcement. ASALT and PEO, IEW&S are starting up what they're calling Project Linchpin. And Project Linchpin's purpose is to look across the Army and the Army's PEOs and understand what are the AI problems the different PEOs are trying to solve, and then go start developing common sets of AI algorithms that multiple different systems can leverage to solve similar problems. So I think ASALT and this initiative kicked off by Mr. Bang and Ms. Swanson and General Barker over at PEO-IEWS, along with the issues and challenges and problems we're trying to solve globally, is coming together at the right time, and I think there's a lot of promise.
Now, this was a lot of discussion of AI and software and algorithms, as opposed to canisters and missiles. You also mentioned congressional support, so I think this is a good time to bring in a question from a unnamed congressional staffer who notes that the SASC, Senate Armed Services FY25 report, seemed critical of the Department/Army's efforts in this vein, and specifically implied that the Army is too self-constraining by focusing on software integration and not doing enough on the overall capability development. So reactions to that?
So I'll take that, since I think that was more directed towards the JPO. So we haven't had an opportunity yet, because we're not resourced yet, to really go over kind of and do the show and tell with our congressional members and staff on how we're executing this effort. When you look at it from an acquisition material developer perspective, and you look at what the JPO is really, the things that I am going to be discretely resourced to do, and the new work that we have to do, it is primarily software. especially if we go the approach that I've talked about, where I'm going to leverage all of the systems that the other services are doing that are already under program managers and are executing with their acquisition program baselines and their milestone decision authorities that I don't necessarily have authority over. So as we've talked about the problem that we have to solve as a JPO from a material developer, it is primarily software. But then the bigger question comes, and that is not sufficient really to provide this capability at endgame. I could do the best joint battle management layer in the world if I don't have IBCS with LTAMs and Sentinel A4 and IFPC and Aegis Guam system there to pull together, and TOC Light, C2BMC, we can't do it. So how are we as a JPO kind of going to manage or maintain oversight over these contributing programs that create the Guam Defense System? So we haven't had an opportunity to go back over. I'm certainly familiar with the SASC language. Look forward to that opportunity with engaging with them. Some of it is how does this fit within material acquisition pathways? And we're having some very robust discussions with OSD. Certainly it's mandated as a special interest, ACAT 1 program. But does that mean major capability acquisition pathway? Does it mean middle tier acquisition? It's pretty strong inference of what it means, but I'm not really doing major capability acquisition things. But there's certainly a level of oversight and reporting on those contributing programs that we're going to have to provide, and we're negotiating that with OSD, the DoD right now. As we get that laid in, we'll go lay it over for Congress, and we'll adjust based upon what they desire.
Well, two quick follow-ups to that, perhaps one for you and one for General Costello. One, if that has to be acquired, that software, that layer has to be acquired, given this is a joint program, who's going to buy it? And then, General Costello, for you, what is the vision for who's going to fight this? Who is going to be in charge on the ground or presumably in the area for the prosecution of the Guam Defense System?
JPO, Guam Defense System, will procure that software,
which will be funded soon. General Costello.
Yeah, so Tom, I don't want to get in front of Admiral Paparo in his role as COM-INDO-PACOM on who's going to be responsible for the overall kind of decision-making and things like that down within the second island chain. But what I will say is that the control mechanisms remain the same. You know, the ADC's authorities will be or can be delegated to a designated representative, and whether that's a regional air defense commander or a sector air defense commander, that is up to or under the purview of the ADC. What I will say is that we will have a joint manning agreement, in place to fill out the Guam Command Center to prosecute the defense of Guam and the second island chain. And from an Army perspective, and frankly, from a joint perspective, this needs to be a total force discussion, right? And active component, guard, reserve, opportunities are endless here to do this.
And we were joking earlier about MREs versus NRE. In the effort to not have soldiers in tents eating MREs, it's going to take a big effort on the MILCON aspect. So I wonder if you could kind of wrap this up here. We're short on time. Your vision in terms of the architecture, whether it be the MILCON, infrastructure on the island, that maybe over to you, General Lozano, and then General Costello, just any other, what are the main urgent needs for the 94th, for instance, as you think about this problem?
Why don't we build it up from the bottom?
Okay. General Costello? If the soldiers...
Yeah, so a lot of my life is spent talking about MILCON right now. And there is tremendous investment that is required to build out, first and foremost, for the quality of life for the soldiers that will man the Guam Defense System, the contractors, the other service members from the Joint Force that will man this. And so we're taking a hard look at those facilities. There are a lot of existing joint facilities in Guam, and we're working very closely with Rear Admiral Huffman out of Joint Task Force Micronesia and Joint Region Marianas, Admiral DeVore, General Tom Polensky down there at Anderson Air Force Base with the 36th Wing, on leveraging as many joint facilities as we can before we commit to spending MILCON dollars. And there is a finite capacity in Guam. We talk about the tyranny of space, time, and distance, and cost is another one when it comes to anything MILCON related within the Pacific. And so we're having weekly meetings about MILCON down in Guam. We've got to make sure that the soldiers and the joint service members that man this system have the quality of life that is expected for our most valuable asset, the people. We've got to make sure that the facilities exist, not only for wartime locations, but in garrison locations, and to prevent damage from natural disasters. I mean, Guam is still largely recovering from Typhoon Mawar, which is about 2 years ago now. And we have to make sure that the soldiers and their equipment are protected from natural disasters as well as we think through the smoke-on shell.
Yeah, I think what I would add is, so from a material developer perspective, a PEO perspective, one of the best things that I can do is provide Army leaders with options and not marry them to a single course of action, right? So at the fundamental basic level, I'm providing tactical hardware, tactical systems, right? And so sure, from an MRE perspective, right, you could employ the systems and house soldiers in tents with MREs, which we absolutely do not want to do, right? But that option is there if we were to get the 911 phone call, right? And so understanding that, then it's a matter of, as we look at each and every site on Guam, and as we do the environmental impact surveys, and as we do the MILCON design charrettes, and as we start to understand how much of a more permanent footprint we might occupy over time, then we start to consider, the quality of life for the soldier and their family on Guam manning this equipment, right? And so we work very collectively. I take multiple trips. I travel out to Guam much more than I would like. It's not a short flight. But we also work collectively not only with the JPO, but with the Army G9 and understanding, what does that really need to look like, and when do those facilities need to be ready so that we can employ the equipment when INDOPACOM is asking us to do so. I also spend a lot of time from a spectrum management perspective, a radiation hazard perspective. As you might imagine, there are a lot of RF frequencies, there's a lot of sensors, a lot of radars, a lot of communication equipment. There is a lot already on Guam, and what we don't want to do is create a conflict in the operation of those systems so that we limit somebody, right? I spent a lot of time talking with the CG of the 36th Wing up at Anderson Air Force Base, right? We have to be able to protect that air base. We also have to enable it and allow it to continue to operate its air battle management function, right? And load up aircraft, fly out aircraft, have aircraft land safely while simultaneously radiating and protecting it, right? So a lot of good collective work going on. We're focused on, getting equipment out there in a timely manner. And I think it's very achievable. And I think we're taking a look at it the right way to ensure that our Army leaders and the INDOPACOM leadership have options.
General Rasch, as you close us out with your vision and for the architecture and all this, I wonder if you could perhaps hit upon the phasing that is perhaps being thought about on this front.
Certain, I'll weave that in. But there was a reason I said let's build it from the bottom up, because if you listen to the answers first, you've got the 94th AAMDC commanding general who's all into MILCON discussions. And as he's having those discussions, there's members from General Lozano's team, there's members from my team, members from Missile Defense Agency, who again up front I said have been working this for a long time, all together. So this is truly an enterprise effort. When you look at what General Lozano talked about is the spectrum, deconfliction. All of those things are all challenges that have to work through. And as long as they continue to do their great efforts, from a material developer perspective, from the AAMDC on the ground, we keep synchronized through my office to highlight those issues. We also have within Department of Defense a senior official for oversight of the Guam Defense, which was a separate memo signed by the Deputy Secretary of Defense for the Undersecretary of the Navy. So he is helping a lot of those other aspects, because again, this is a U.S. territory, right? So there's other intergovernmental agency things that have to be worked, and that's where they're working. So it's a whole of DoD approach here. With regards to, I'll call it the phasing, all of these programs, all of these components, elements that make up the architecture are on timelines, and they're funded within the POM. So as General Lozano his team is fielding LTAMs or IBCS or IFPIC, or we get SPY-6 or VLS launchers or deliveries of missiles, they will all roll in over time. And we're trying to ensure that as we get systems ready to be delivered, that we can actually turn those into capabilities, right? So a radar without all the sustainment, without the trained soldiers, without a minimal set of MILCON, and those will be discussions we have down the line. Hey, this site isn't complete, but we've got a radar that's ready. Do we still want to send the radar over? Can we use an alternate site for that? Probably a good idea to have them anyway. So, we're not just telegraphed. Look at all the nice little new concrete pours all over Guam. That's where the U.S. is going to be. But have that flexibility. But it's my job, my team's job as a joint PO to, as Frank said, to give those options. So as Frank is working all the Army contribution to this, and as MDA is working all of their aspects, and Navy working their aspects, as we bring those together to create that capability, we basically build Guam Defense over time. Initially, from a command and control, which is, as you can tell, I'm really focused in, because that'll be in our lane. We'll start swivel chair. We'll start that fight there, or like we do today. But hopefully we won't stay there long, because we've got to get at that next level of integration, as we've discussed for the last hour, to really have a chance against this very, very complex threat that we face.
Well, it's the hardest missile defense problem. All of you and your teams are working to solve it. Thanks for your leadership and for your time to come out today and talk about it and inform all of us about this important issue. So thank you all.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.